Good evening. Y'all come on in, have a seat, enjoy life. Good to visit with our sojourners for a little bit. They're going to be mostly they'll be gone by the weekend probably. Tomorrow and Friday they'll be heading out. So I know the Children's Home has really appreciated you guys being there. It's always a good thing. Always a good thing. Hey, we're in Micah tonight, so go ahead and flip over to it. This is the sixth of our minor prophets, so we're right at that halfway point. Next week we'll start the downhill slide of the last six of the minor prophets. Tonight is Micah. It's right after the book of Jonah. When we do Bible reading, probably not very many people do the minor prophets or something, but it's pretty good. Micah is a bit of a challenge. It's a writing that jumps around. Who's he talking to? When's he talking to these people? What's he talking to these people about? And so it is a little bit of a challenge. It was certainly a challenge to me working on this lesson. But I want to begin by giving you a little bit of historical context. I think that's important. The northern king, I'm going to say Pekah, P-E-K-A-H. I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation or not because I have lost the app on my phone that does Bible pronunciations. It now wants me to pay for it. I don't pay for apps, so anyway, I used to use that all the time when it was free. So anyway, Pekah, this is 2 Kings chapter 15, had been fighting with the Assyrians. Now, we all know we got northern Israel, we got southern Judah, we got Assyria and Babylon over here, and we have a lot of problems during this period of time with aggression from the empires of Assyria and Babylon. So he has been fighting with them, and he lost. And so he lost some territory in northern Israel, lost some territory to that. So when Hoshea, after Pekah, when Hoshea became king, 2 Kings 17, then he was basically a vassal to Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria. And he was having to pay tribute. And what they used to do back then when they would, it was not uncommon, by the way, for somebody to think they're bigger than you, and so they would attack you. Maybe they wanted your resources, but more than anything, they wanted your money. And so you would have to pay tribute to them to keep them away from you so they wouldn't come in and destroy you. And so that's what Hoshea, not Hosea, S-H-O-S-H-E-A, Hoshea, King Hoshea was doing. He was having to pay tribute to Assyria. Well, he got tired of that. He just, he kind of buckled up and said, I'm not going to pay tribute to Assyria anymore. And so he quit paying. He stopped the credit card. He stopped the payment. And he went to Egypt and said, hey, I need help. And Egypt said, not my problem, and they wouldn't help. So it wasn't long before Shalmaneser heard or got wind that Hoshea was no longer paying his tribute. So he went in and took care of business, invaded northern Israel, besieged Samaria. That was the capital of northern Israel. If you're gonna conquer a nation, you go conquer their capital because that's where all their power, armies, everything is. So he went and besieged Samaria, the capital of northern Israel, for 3 years and finally conquered them. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It's hard for me to believe northern Israel could hold out for 3 years, but they did. And so he finally conquered them, and then that's when they were hauled off, 722 BC, into Assyrian captivity, lost to history. The northern kingdom no longer existed. Okay, so that was, Hoshea was the last king of the northern kingdom, and because of his mishandling of the relationship between Israel and Assyria, they lost Israel. and so it's gone forever. It was during this period of time, from about 735 BC to about 700 BC, that Micah was prophesying. And of course, 735, 700, way up here in 722 is when Israel went away into Assyria. And so Micah was a prophet to Israel, but he was also a prophet to Judah. He prophesied for a long time. And but he didn't get to prophesy a long time to Israel. Before too long, Israel went away. This is a relief of found in the Assyrian area of Israel being taken captive into Assyria. And so this relief is now in the British Museum, but kings generally documented their conquests. And since not everybody could write, or not everybody could read the language of the country or whatever, oftentimes things were done in pictures. And so therefore you go to Egypt, you see a lot of pictures. You go into the Middle East, you see, Israel, Babylon in there, you see a lot of pictures. And so this is a relief of Assyria taking Israel captive and all their stuff. Now, the top of that relief was cut off a little bit, but you don't see human legs there except on the left. You see animal legs. So when a nation would conquer another nation, they just didn't take the people off. They took everything they owned with them. So Israel was left barren. And they took the animals, and they took their wealth, they took their, especially things of value like their gold and whatever. And Israel by this time had created a couple of temples. There was one down there in the capital of Samaria, and there was also one up further north in Dan. And so those were fairly elaborate, and those were destroyed and taken as well. Pardon me, I have to clear my throat a little bit. All right. That's kind of the background setting of Micah being a prophet. So who was Micah? Well, his name means who is like Jehovah. Now, that doesn't refer to Micah. It doesn't mean Micah is who is like Jehovah. It's more of a question. Who is like Jehovah? So his name, Micah, means who is like Jehovah? Like, who could it possibly be? And of course, the answer is nobody. So he had a pretty good name. Who is like Jehovah? He prophesied, as I mentioned earlier, just before northern Israel went off into captivity. And the focus of his message was the absolute sovereignty of God. And this is what got Israel into trouble in the first place. If you remember, after Solomon's reign as king, you got Saul, David, Solomon. That's when the nation of Israel split into northern kingdom, southern kingdom. And it doesn't mean that Israel didn't have corruption issues before them, but after them, they really had a lot of corruption issues. When they divided God's kingdom up, bad things began to happen, and especially in northern Israel. Because they refused to go into southern Judah to worship at the temple. They refused to go to Jerusalem and worship at the temple because it was in Judah. So they started making their own temples. And of course, then obviously they began to get into idol worship and all kinds of things like that. So if you read Micah chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reign of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." So the very first verse sets out the timeline. Now we know where that between 735 and 700 BC. Now we know when he prophesied, because that's when those kings reigned in Judah. Didn't mention the kings above, but he did mention the kings below. So Micah prophesied during that period of time. He was also contemporary with Isaiah. Most of us who enjoy the history of the Old Testament kind of pick out Isaiah as, hey, he is like the chief prophet, okay? That's not true. It's just that that's kind of where we go because he did so much messianic prophecy. He talked so much about the coming of the Messiah and or the king, as they referred to it then. And so he was contemporary with Isaiah, which means Isaiah was prophesying at that time. Also Amos and Hosea were. We've already studied Amos and Hosea. And so he was prophesying at the same time as the last two prophets that we looked into. All right, so, okay, who were the kings? Okay, now I listed here the northern kings and the southern kings. I think I had this up there last time, not for sure. But of course, Hoshea was the last northern king, went off into captivity into Assyria, and then the three kings of Judah listed at the bottom are the ones that are listed as the prophet, as the kings who were reigning in Judah when Micah was prophesying. Okay, now Jotham was a decent king, and when I say decent, I mean in Judah, a lot of things were bad. Just because they had a good king didn't mean everything was going well. That's what I'm trying to say. And so, Jotham was a decent king. We give him a thumbs up. He reigned for 16 years. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he was 41 when he died. And so he was decent, even though some tough things were going on in Judah at that time. Ahaz, got a thumbs down on Ahaz. Ahaz was a bad king. He is the son of Jotham, and he took over when he was 20 years old. He was unrighteous. Probably, as some scholars say, the most unrighteous king Judah ever had. Ahaz was the bad guy, okay? One of his great sins was that he offered his children on the altar of Molech in the valley of Hinnom. Now, I didn't put a picture of Molech up here. We've used that the last couple of weeks, but he is the Canaanite god that was created out of bronze, a bronze god, bull-type head with his hands stretched out like this. He was hollow on the inside, and the priests of Molech kept a fire burning inside of him, and so the brass got burning hot, and people would bring their children down and lay them on the arms of Molech, and they would fry to death. And you and I can hardly think of anything worse than that. It's hard to imagine anybody would fall for that. I don't care if they knew who God was or didn't know who God was. It's just hard to believe anybody would fall for that, because even when God created man, he still created man to know what's right and to know what's wrong. And that's the problem of the whole thing with Noah. God destroyed them because they knew right from wrong, and yet they chose wrong, okay? And so he was just a bad king. Ahaz was literally as bad as it gets. So he reigned in Jerusalem when Hoshea and Israel was taken off into Assyrian captivity. So Hoshea was the king of the north, Ahaz was the king of the south, and being the bad guy, we don't picture and having this family division between the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, we don't see Ahaz going to the rescue of Israel, you know. Oh, you guys are getting deported, good for you. No, we don't see him helping out at all. And then, of course, there was Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah is the king that, at least when we were younger, we used to fool a lot of people, because we would tell them what we thought was right, and they would say, no, it isn't. We said, yes, it's biblical. It's in Hezekiah 4 and verse 3. And they grab their Bibles, start looking, you know. So That's was kind of a bad joke to play on people. But anyway, Hezekiah was a good king, all right? Hezekiah became king at 25. These guys are becoming kings earlier because the kings aren't living long. You know, we go back in the Old Testament, we see these guys living 800, 900 years, but the kings weren't living very long. Some of them because they were murdered, some of them just because they were bad guys. But Hezekiah became king at 25, and he reigned for 29 years. Okay, so I think he was 54 when he passed. He was literally an exceptional king who worked to bring about real reform in Judah. Judah was basically as corrupt as Israel was, and he worked very hard to bring that about and try to do a good job. Okay, all right. So what was the problem? Okay, the problem was that sin was in the nations, both of them, north and south. Sin brings consequences. You know, we say, well, you know, even Paul writes to churches and says, who were thinking, hey, since the grace of God is so wonderful, let's sin some more so God will give us some more grace. You know, he'll do some great things for us. People got all confused about that, even in New Testament times. Well, back then, so much of Israel and Judah just walked away from God. It wasn't that they were concerned about their sins. They just would walk away from God and do what they wanted to do. And we see that same scenario doesn't have to be in a theocracy like Israel or Judah. It can be in a country like ours or anybody else's. People just do what they want to do. And so most of the time when that happens, people get in trouble. You and I are not of ourselves wise enough to know everything that we know how to make things perfect. We know how to do what we want to do and get by with it. It's just not true. We have to have, it's built in us to have authority that is good. And so that's the way God set Israel up. And, you know, sometimes they went with it, sometimes they didn't. We see this when Moses was bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt and crossing the desert and everything. And it wasn't long, after seeing all these wonderful miracles, they decided they'd make them a golden calf, you know. So we just look at this and we say, duh, what's wrong with you? We have to stop and try to understand that that goes on all the time, and it goes on with our age as well as it went on with their age. So let's look at the social and religious conditions during that time. We're still in the book of Micah. Look at chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, and verse 8 and 9. 1 and 2. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning they light at morning's light they carry it out because it's in their power to do so. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud a man of his home, a fellow man of his inheritance. We're talking leadership corruption here. We're in a country, let's just take a country like ours, and you've been defrauded. You've been done wrong. Something bad has happened. Somebody has taken advantage of you in this area or that area. What's your recourse? You say, well, I call the police. Well, that's fine. No, police are kind of in this middle thing. They come and investigate and whatever. What you want is a good judge. You want a good judge to help you out of that situation. A bad judge gets you in trouble. That's what we're dealing with in Micah chapter 2. The first couple of verses, we're dealing with bad judges here who allow people to be defrauded, who allow people to be ripped off. And so who's gonna get ripped off when you have bad judges? It's going to be a class warfare thing, because the guy that can pay the judge the most is going to get his way. And if you can't pay the judge enough, the decisions are going to go against you. This is the kind of evil and sinfulness that was going on in Judah at that time. They did not have good judges. They didn't have folks take care of them. Look at verses 8 and 9. Lately, he says, my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without care. You're ripping off people coming through here, like men returning from battle. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessings from their children forever. Think about land for a second. How was land set up in the promised land when Joshua brought the children of Israel over and Moses had gotten the law from God and everything? That land was yours. Yeah, you could sell it or let somebody have it, but then you had a jubilee. You had every 50 years. This went back to you. Wouldn't that be pretty cool? I mean, if you were going to live, if you were, say, 20 years old and you were going to live 50 and you decided to sell your property for several $1 million because when you turned 70 and had your birthday, guess what? It comes back to me and I can sell it again, okay? So you can even defraud something that's good. You can do bad with good as well. And so they're sinful leaders, they're sinful judges, they're sinful prophets, they're sinful priests. Look at chapter 3 and verse 1 and 2. He says, listen, you leaders. Now that literal word is head. We don't call them head today, we call them leaders. But that literal Hebrew word is head. Listen, you heads. That means you're up here. Okay, you're the head of this thing. Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel. Should you not know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skins from my people and the flesh from their bones? Jump down to verse 5. This is what the Lord says. As for the prophets who lead my people astray. Are you serious? Thy prophets are now leading the people astray. If one feeds them, they proclaim peace. In other words, what are you going to do for me? What have you done for me lately? If you do something good for me, I'll prophesy wonderful things, okay? If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him. Verse 6, therefore night will come over you without visions and darkness without divination. The sun will set for the prophets, and that day will go dark for them. The seers will be ashamed, and the diviners disgraced. They will all cover their faces because there is no answer from God. They're doing things without an answer from God. They're prophesying, but God's not telling them what to prophesy. Therefore, they're prophesying for their own good, for whatever it is that they want. These are the things that are going on. It's a wonder why God puts up with them. Well, he didn't put up with Israel, did he? He allowed them to go away into captivity. And he allowed them to be wiped off of the history books, never to be seen again. All right, look at verses 9, still in chapter 3. Look at verses 9 through 12. Hear this, you leaders of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right, who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness. Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come on us. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The temple hill, a mound overgrown by thickets. Now that's prophecy, and that's prophecy that came true. The prophecy of Israel north took place much quicker than the prophecy of Judah in the south. That didn't happen for a couple hundred years later. All right, let's look at the sins of the people. We know the sins of the leaders, priests, prophets, judges, you name it. Let's look at the sins of the people. As we kind of mentioned a little earlier with the whole Molech thing, of course, we were talking about Ahaz the king, but people had their sins as well. It wasn't just the leaders. When a leader sins, other people tend to follow, because that's what leaders are. They are people who you follow, okay? And so they began to get into idol worship as well. Chapter 5, verse 12 through 14. I will destroy your witchcraft, and you will no longer cast spells. I will destroy your carved images and your sacred stones from among you, and you will no longer bow down to the works of your hands. I will uproot from among you the Asherah poles and demolish your cities. Notice how he said there, you will no longer bow down to the works of your hands. Is that not a clue? Hey guys, this idol is a work of your hands. You created this idol. This is not a God. This is something that you created, okay? You just created this thing. It's not God. It's just but they were used to that. All the way back into Egypt, you know, they had it was polytheism. They had all these gods, the god of the river and the god of the sun, god of the moon, god of this. These gods are over these gods, and these two gods mated, and they had a child, and that was another god, and they had all these different gods. I think Israel was in Egypt too long, and they began to pick up on this stuff. And even when God showed miracles to them, they eventually said, let's go back to Egypt. You know, at least we could eat back there. At least we had jobs. And they certainly did begin to worship a lot of their gods, you know, of Egypt. A lack of integrity. You know, we deal with a lot of that today, politically especially. Don't we want to vote people in that seem to have some integrity about them? And then many of us say there is no integrity up there. You know, there's nobody with integrity. Be nice to have, but it's good for you to practice, isn't it? No matter whether you're raising children, no matter whether you're working in a job, you want to have some integrity. Says, I'm working at this job and I'm doing the best I can, and other people are making shortcuts and they're not working as long and their quality isn't nearly as bad, but they're friends with the boss or something like that, and here I am working hard. You know what integrity says about that? Stop griping and work your best. Do your best and quit worrying about the rest of them. But human nature seems to say, if I have to do this, you have to do it. If I have to work hard, you have to work hard. That's not what God said, but that's what our nature tends to say. So we gripe about things like that. Christians should be the best workers out there. They should be the ones that everybody lifts up and says, man, that's a good worker. And even if nobody does recognize, we still should be the very best that we can be. That's what we should do. That's what they should do. But again, they don't want to. Chapter 6, verse 12. Her rich men are violent, her people are liars, and their tongues speak deceitfully. Chapter 7, 2 through 6. The godly have been swept from the land. That's not a good picture. Not one upright man remains. All men lie in wait to shed blood. Each hunts his brother with a net. Both hands are skilled in doing evil. A ruler demands gifts. A judge accepts bribes. The powerful dictate what they desire. They all conspire together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright, worse than a thorn hedge. The day of your watchman has come. The day God visits you, now is the time of their confusion. Do not trust a neighbor. Put no confidence in a friend, even with her who lies in your embrace. That's your spouse. Be careful of your words. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter raises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household. Micah is painting a picture of a place none of us want to live, but he's telling the truth. This is how bad things have gotten. This is how terrible things have been. It's pretty disgusting, okay. So what's Micah's picture of God? Now, he's given us a picture of Israel, and he's given us a picture of Judah. He's given us a picture of the leaders. He's given us a picture of the judges. He's given us a picture of the priest, and he's given us a picture of all the people that live there. So what does he think about God? What is his picture of God? The very last chapter of Micah, beginning in verse 18, Micah writes this: "Who is a God like you?" That's kind of what his name is. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives their transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? Now stop just for a second. He's just gone through all of this negative stuff, all of this stuff that Israel and Judah have been doing wrong, all of their sins, all of their ugliness. And then he talks about God at the end, and he says, who's a God like you? Who pardons, I'm putting some words in here, who pardons their sins, who forgives the things these people have been doing, the remnant of his inheritance. There's not very many left. 10 tribes are gone. There's only 2 tribes left. Look at verse 19. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all of our iniquities into the depths of the sea. You will be true to Jacob, that's the dad of all these tribes, and show mercy to Abraham, as you pledged an oath to our fathers in days long ago. Now, when I read verse 20, I don't know if Micah's talking about forgiveness of Judah now and things will get better, or whether he's talking about when the Christ comes, when the Messiah comes. I don't know. He does talk about that. We'll get into that in just a second. But in this point, I'm not sure when he's referring to this. Because at this time, he's got a decent king in place, but he's got people and leaders and judges and priests and all this that are prophets that are bad, that have gone bad. They've turned away from the way of God. But he always, when he talks about God, he always comes back to the mercifulness of God. He always comes back to God has a plan and he'll forgive you. Now, if you lived in a land where all these bad things were happening and you could not take an issue to a judge because you didn't have enough money to give him to make the right decision, or something like that, it'd be hard. Be hard to do. But God has been patient with Israel from the time they left Egypt to now, and even later. God has been very patient with them, even though they have done bad things. Now, one of the reasons I think for that is that Israel is no different than anybody else. Why did God pick Abraham to create this large nation and be his people? I don't know. You have to ask Abraham, have to ask God. Why did he do that? All people tend to be alike, given to their own nature. And so God, to get his people where he needs to get them, God has to institute a lot of grace. I mentioned last time, you remember, a lot of people look at the Old Testament and say the Old Testament is a system of works and laws. New Testament is a system of grace. Wrong. Correct about New Testament. Old Testament is also a system of grace. Or otherwise, God would not have even let Noah and his family live, probably. God would have taken them out because all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, according to the Apostle Paul. And they were then and they are now. So he's got some very difficult things ahead of him. So what is Micah's picture of God? Now what is Micah's picture of the king? Jesus, the conquering king, the final king, all right? In chapter 5, we get this picture. Micah is not all of the prophets are Messianic prophets, but Isaiah is the biggie in my book, but Micah is also a Messianic prophet. Look at chapter 5. The first part of verse 2 says, "But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah," I can't pronounce that very well. He's not talking about two different places. Bethlehem's name was Ephrathah before it was Bethlehem. And then some scholars say that the area around Bethlehem was called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Ephrathah. Okay, so he's talking about the same place. "But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me the one who will be ruler over Israel." He's beginning to prophesy about the coming Messiah, Jesus Christ. And then look at the second part of verse 2. He says, "whose origins are of old, from ancient times." When does Jesus Christ, when does the Messiah have an origin? He was born, he was incarnate human being in Bethlehem, but he existed before that. He was there in the beginning, in the creation. He's the Son of God. He has no origin. Micah, via the inspiration of God, has said, hey, there's a king coming that has a lack of origin. He didn't have a beginning. You know, we talk about that even in discussions today about whether God exists or not. Who made God? No, God's always been here. That's the way our Lord is. He talks about his work, verses 3 and 4. "Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join Israel. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth." Wow, that's our Lord. And then he ends it with a shalom. He ends it with what all these folks have been looking for in the first place is peace. Shalom, peace on earth. And he will be their peace. Today there may be terrible things happening. There may be sin in the world. There may be ugliness in the world. There may be things that are, you know, one of the things we hear so much about today, it's not funny, but it's almost laughable sometimes, is that's not fair. It's not fair. And so legislators go and try to work things out so they'll be fair. It's almost laughable. You can't do that. You can't make things fair. It's impossible. But you can give peace. God brings peace. He doesn't bring fairness. He brings peace. And there will be peace. Peace supersedes unfairness. Peace supersedes everything else that's going wrong. Shalom. That's why the Jews use that term so often and so much. Shalom. And then, of course, probably the most popular verse in all of Micah is in chapter 6 and verse 8. "He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." So we ask ourselves, what is my responsibility as a Christian? It is to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. What was their role back then? Hundreds of years back into BC, okay? 700 plus years before the Messiah comes. What was their role? Their role was to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with their God. So we can learn several things from Micah. We can learn things aren't fair. We can learn corruption exists. We can understand that if you don't walk with God, you're in trouble. If your leaders don't walk with God, you're in more trouble. If those who claim to be righteous don't walk with God, you're in more trouble. But you have a responsibility, and that is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's what we do. Next week, Zephaniah. You're dismissed. I think we have our devotional across the street. Across the what? Across the foyer. Okay, into the fellowship room over there. God bless. Zephaniah next time.